My name is Sophia, and at 67, I used to believe I understood people, especially family. I thought I knew how love worked, how loyalty held things together, even when life got difficult. I was wrong. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, slipped neatly through the mail slot of my small flat. It was thick, expensive paper, too elegant for something as simple as a family dinner. My son never cared for details like that, which meant the invitation hadn't really come from him. "Join us for a special evening," it read. No warmth, no personal note, just polished words arranged with intention. I already knew who had written it. Lily, my son Daniel's wife. I hadn't seen them in almost 3 months, not since a brief visit where Lily had spent most of the time scrolling through her phone while Daniel talked about work. Still, I told myself this dinner might be different. People change. Situations change. Hope has a way of making you ignore what you already know. I stood in front of my wardrobe that evening longer than necessary, running my fingers over dresses I hadn't worn in years. I chose a simple dark green one. Nothing flashy, but still elegant. It reminded me of who I used to be before life became quieter, smaller. Before I became someone easy to overlook. The restaurant they chose was far beyond anything I would normally consider. Soft golden lighting spilled from crystal fixtures, and every table looked like it belonged in a magazine. Even the air felt expensive, perfumed with something subtle and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a moment at the entrance, adjusting my coat, reminding myself I belonged anywhere I chose to be. When I reached their table, Daniel stood up quickly, his smile automatic. "Mom," he said, giving me a brief hug. It felt rehearsed. Lily remained seated, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning me in a way that made me feel like I was being evaluated rather than greeted. "Sophia," she said, her tone light but sharp underneath. "You made it." I smiled anyway and sat down. Dinner began with polite conversation, but something about it felt hollow. Daniel talked about his promotion, Lily added comments about their plans, new investments, trips abroad, things that seemed to revolve around success and status. Every time I spoke, Lily reacted with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Not rude enough to call out, but just enough to make me feel misplaced. When the waiter arrived, Lily ordered without hesitation. "We'll have the most recommended wine," she said confidently, then glanced at me. "Unless you'd prefer something simpler?" The pause lingered just a second too long. "I'm fine with whatever you choose," I replied calmly. But inside, something tightened. As the evening went on, I noticed a pattern. Every topic somehow circled back to money, what they had, what they planned, what others lacked. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. And then, slowly, the conversation turned toward me. "So," Lily said casually, swirling her glass, "how are you finding your little place these days?" Little place. Such a small phrase, yet so carefully chosen. "It suits me," I answered. "I suppose simplicity has its charm," she replied, smiling faintly. "Though I can't imagine living like that long term." Daniel said nothing. He just kept cutting his food, avoiding my gaze. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. A few minutes later, Lily leaned back slightly, studying me again. "You know," she continued, "we've been talking about the future, about what makes sense for everyone." Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" I asked. Daniel finally looked up, but there was hesitation in his expression. "Well," he said slowly, "we're just thinking it might not be ideal for you to live alone anymore." There it was. Not concern, not love, a suggestion wrapped in control. "I'm doing perfectly fine," I replied. Lily let out a soft laugh, not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to cut. "Of course you think that," she said. "But let's be realistic. It's not exactly sustainable, is it? I felt heat rise to my face, but I kept my voice steady. And what exactly are you suggesting? She leaned forward slightly, her expression almost sympathetic. There are places, she said smoothly. Comfortable ones. Safe. People your age live there. It would be more appropriate. Appropriate. I understood now. They weren't inviting me to dinner. They were positioning me. I don't need that, I said quietly. Lily sighed, as if I were being difficult. Sophia, she said, her voice softening in a way that felt rehearsed, you have to face reality at some point. You're alone. Your lifestyle isn't exactly secure. Then she took a sip of her wine and added, almost casually, you can't expect things to just work out forever. Daniel still said nothing. I looked at him, waiting, hoping for something. A word. A defense. Anything. But they had already decided my value. My phone rang, cutting through the silence. Daniel. I watched it vibrate on the table for a few seconds before answering. Sophia, thank God, he said quickly. I've been trying to reach you. I needed some time, I replied. About tonight, he began, his tone careful. Lily didn't mean it the way it sounded. I almost smiled. How exactly did she mean it? I asked. There was a pause. She's just worried about you, he said finally. We both are. Of course. Concern. Always dressed as concern. I see, I said. We were thinking maybe you could come over this weekend, he continued. We can talk properly. Lily wants to apologize. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the papers spread out in front of me. An apology. From Lily. The thought alone felt almost amusing. I'll think about it, I said, and ended the call before he could say more. For a while, I just sat there, letting everything settle into place. The past few years replayed in my mind, not as memories, but as patterns I hadn't wanted to see before. The subtle comments, the distance, the way every interaction had slowly shifted from connection to calculation. And I realized something important. This wasn't sudden. This was who they had become. I stood up and walked to my bedroom, opening a closet I hadn't fully explored in years. Inside hung pieces of my old life, tailored coats, elegant dresses, shoes I used to wear without thinking twice, jewelry tucked away in velvet boxes. I reached for a black coat, running my fingers along the fabric. Why had I hidden all of this? Not because I had to, because I thought it didn't matter anymore. Because I had convinced myself that becoming smaller would make things easier. I let out a quiet breath. No more. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, but instead of routine, I felt purpose. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city slowly come to life. People moving, cars passing, everything continuing as if nothing had changed. But something had. Inside me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Good morning, a calm voice answered. Hello, I said. This is Sophia. I need to schedule a meeting. Today, if possible. There was a brief pause. Of course, the voice replied. We'll make it happen. After the call, I stood up and got ready. Not the way I had for the dinner, trying to fit into someone else's expectations, but the way I used to dress when I knew exactly who I was. When I stepped outside, I felt different. Not richer, not stronger, just certain. The office I arrived at was familiar, though I hadn't visited in quite some time. Everything inside was as I remembered, quiet, efficient, professional. I was greeted warmly and led into a private room. Sophia, the woman across from me said with a slight smile. It's been a while. It has, I agreed. But I think it's time I stopped postponing certain decisions. She nodded, understanding more than I had to explain. We talked for over an hour. About assets. About control. about what happens when people assume they are entitled to something that was never promised. I listened carefully, asked questions, made notes. Not out of emotion, out of intention. When I left the building, I felt lighter. Not because anything had been taken away, but because something had finally been put in order. That afternoon, I walked through a neighborhood I hadn't visited in years. Quiet streets, large homes, trees lining the sidewalks. It wasn't about luxury, it was about space, about possibility. I stopped in front of one particular house, studying it for a long moment. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around waiting for someone else to show up. A future that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. Are you okay? I looked at the screen, then slowly typed a response. I'm better than you think. I didn't add anything else, because I wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. As I slipped my phone back into my bag and took one last look at the house in front of me, a quiet thought settled in my mind. They believed they understood my life. They believed they knew my limits. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I bought the house 3 days later. No hesitation, no second opinions, no need to think it over. The moment I stepped inside again with the agent, I already knew. It wasn't just about the size or the quiet street or the tall windows that filled every room with light. It was about what the place represented. Space. Freedom. A life that belonged entirely to me. The paperwork was handled quickly. When you pay in full, people don't ask many questions. They don't doubt your decisions. They don't suggest alternatives. They simply nod, smile, and make things happen. It was refreshing. Within a week, the keys were in my hand. Within 2, I was no longer living in that small flat where I had spent years pretending I needed less than I actually had. The move itself was surprisingly easy. I didn't take everything, only what mattered. Old photographs, a few pieces of furniture, books I had read more than once. The rest I left behind without regret. It felt less like leaving something and more like shedding a version of myself I no longer needed. The first night in the house, I didn't turn on the television or play music. I simply walked from room to room, slowly, taking everything in. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. By the 3rd week, everything was in place. The kitchen was stocked, the bedroom arranged, the living room warm and lived in. Fresh flowers sat on the table by the entrance, something I hadn't done for myself in a long time. That was when I decided it was time. I called Daniel. He answered on the 2nd ring, his voice tense. Mom, I've moved, I said calmly. There was a pause. Moved, he repeated. What do you mean? I bought a house. Silence. Not the kind filled with confusion. The kind filled with calculation. What kind of house? He asked finally. A large one, I replied. In a quiet area. I think you'll like it. Another pause, longer this time. How did you? He started, then stopped. I mean, where did the money come from? I walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the garden where workers were finishing the last details. Your father made very good decisions, I said. And so did I. I could almost hear Lily in the background, asking questions, demanding answers. We should come see it, Daniel said quickly. This weekend. Saturday, I replied. In the afternoon. That works, he said. Too quickly. When I ended the call, I allowed myself a small smile. I knew exactly what was happening on their side of that conversation. Confusion turning into curiosity. Curiosity turning into interest. And interest into expectation. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze that moved through the trees like something alive. I spent the morning preparing, not out of nervousness, but out of intention. Coffee, pastries, everything set neatly on the table. I wasn't hosting family. I was setting a stage. At exactly 2 o'clock, their car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as they sat inside for a moment, talking. Lily's hands moved sharply as she spoke, Daniel staring straight ahead. Then they stepped out. Lily had dressed carefully. I could tell immediately. Light colors, polished look, the kind of outfit designed to impress before a single word was spoken. Daniel looked different, less confident than usual. I opened the door before they reached it. "Welcome," I said. Daniel hugged me, but there was tension in it. Lily smiled, but her eyes were already scanning everything behind me. "Sophia," she said, stepping inside. "This is impressive. Not warm, not surprised, measured. Would you like a tour?" I asked. She didn't even hesitate. Yes. We moved through the house slowly. The living room, the kitchen, the dining area. Lily's attention was sharp. She noticed everything. The materials, the layout, the size of each space. She wasn't just looking. She was assessing. Daniel followed quietly, but I could feel his growing unease. When we reached the upstairs rooms, Lily finally spoke again, her tone shifting slightly. "This is a lot of space for one person," she said, running her hand along the wall. "I like space," I replied. "Of course," she said quickly, smiling again. "It's just practical considerations, you know?" There it was. We continued the tour, and with every room, I watched the same pattern unfold. Admiration slowly blending into something else. Something more possessive. By the time we returned to the living room, I could feel it clearly. They had already begun imagining themselves here. We sat down at the table, and I poured coffee. Lily didn't waste time. "You know," she began casually, "we've been thinking a lot about the future." I didn't respond. I simply waited. Daniel cleared his throat. "Our place is starting to feel small." Lily nodded. "Especially if we're planning ahead." "Planning what?" I asked. She smiled, but this time it was different. Sharper. "A family," she said. I held her gaze, saying nothing. "And this house," she continued, gesturing around, "is perfect for that. The space, the neighborhood, everything." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "It just makes sense." Makes sense. Such an interesting phrase. "So, what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Lily exchanged a quick look with Daniel, then turned back to me. "We move in," she said simply. "All of us. Together." There it was. Not a question. Not a request. A plan. I took a slow sip of my coffee, giving myself a moment, not because I needed it, but because I wanted them to sit in the silence. "And where would I be in this arrangement?" I asked calmly. Lily's smile widened slightly. "Of course you'd stay here," she said. "We'd take care of everything. The house, the expenses, you wouldn't have to worry about anything." Take care. Such a generous offer. "And the rooms?" I asked. "Oh, we've already thought about that," she said quickly. "The upstairs would be perfect for us. The master bedroom, obviously, and then space for the children later." Children. Already placed into a future that wasn't theirs to design. Daniel nodded, as if everything had already been agreed upon. "It would be good for everyone," he added. "Good. For everyone." I set my cup down carefully. "I see," I said. Lily leaned back, satisfied. "I knew you'd understand." Understand. Yes. I understood perfectly. I understood that they hadn't come here to reconnect. They hadn't come to see me. They had come to claim something. And in their minds, it was already theirs. I stood up slowly. "I need to make a quick call," I said. "Of course," Lily replied, already turning back to Daniel with a small, excited smile. As I walked toward the next room, I could hear her voice, lower now, but filled with anticipation. "This is going to work perfectly," she whispered.
Perfectly.
I closed the door behind me and stood still for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. Not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with complete certainty. Because now, finally, everything was clear. I didn't rush the call. That was the first thing I noticed about myself as I stood in my study, phone in hand, listening to the faint murmur of their voices in the next room. Lily's tone carried through the walls, light, excited, already planning. Daniel spoke less, but I could hear agreement in every quiet response he gave her. They had already moved in, not physically, but in their minds. This house was no longer mine. I dialed the number slowly, deliberately. When the call connected, I spoke calmly. "I need to make some changes. Today." There was no need to explain everything. Some decisions don't require long conversations. They require clarity. And I had that now in a way I hadn't felt in years. After confirming the meeting, I ended the call and stood there for a moment longer, looking around the room. This space, this house, everything I had built, it wasn't just property. It was the result of choices, of discipline, of years spent thinking ahead while others assumed things would simply be handed to them. And now, someone else believed they could step in and take it. Not ask.
Take.
I let out a quiet breath and opened the door. They were exactly where I had left them. Lily standing near the window, gesturing as she spoke. Daniel watching her with a mix of agreement and uncertainty. "Oh, good," Lily said brightly when she saw me. "We were just talking about how we could arrange things. I think the upstairs layout works perfectly for us." For us. I walked back to my chair and sat down, folding my hands calmly. "You've thought this through," I said. "Of course," she replied with a confident smile. "It's important to plan ahead." Daniel nodded. "It just makes sense, Mom. You don't need all this space on your own." There it was again. What I need.
Decided for me.
And what if I want it? I asked. Lily tilted her head slightly, as if the question itself didn't quite register. "But why would you?" she said gently. "It's not practical." Practical. Such a useful word when you want to disguise control as logic. I looked at her carefully, then at Daniel. "I bought this house because I wanted it," I said. "Not because I needed it." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We're just trying to help." "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to reorganize my life in a way that benefits you." The room went still. Lily's smile faded, just slightly. "That's not fair," she said. "We're thinking about family." "Are you?" I asked. Her expression sharpened. "Of course we are." "Then tell me," I said, leaning back slightly, "when was the last time you visited me without a purpose? Without an agenda?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lily answered instead. "That's not the point." "It is the only point," I said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lily exhaled slowly, as if adjusting her approach. "Sophia," she said, her voice softer now, almost patient, "you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're offering you security, stability. You won't have to deal with everything alone." "I'm not alone," I replied. She gave a small, almost pitying smile. "You live alone." "That's not the same thing." Daniel looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, we're just trying to make things better," he said. "For everyone. Better. Always better." "For you?" I said. The silence that followed was heavier this time. Lily straightened slightly, her tone losing its softness. "Well," she said, "yes. It would benefit us too. That's what family does. We support each other." Support. An interesting word when it only moves in one direction. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "And what exactly would you be supporting me with?" I asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Well, managing the house, helping with things, making sure everything runs smoothly. In my own home, I interrupted gently. She hesitated. Daniel stepped in quickly. Mom, you're focusing on the wrong thing. This is about the future. Yes, I said. It is. And for the first time, I let a small smile appear.
Not warm.
Not polite.
Certain.
I think you're both very confident about a future you don't control, I added. Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said calmly, that you're making plans based on assumptions. What assumptions? She asked, her tone sharpening. That this house is available to you, I replied. That my life is something you can reorganize. That my choices will align with your expectations. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We're not assuming anything. We're just discussing options. No, I said quietly. You're presenting a decision. The room went silent again. Lily crossed her arms slightly, no longer pretending. So, what are you saying? She asked. I stood up slowly. I'm saying this house is not part of your future, I said. Daniel froze. Lily stared at me, disbelief flickering across her face. That doesn't make any sense, she said. Why wouldn't it be? Because it belongs to me, I replied simply. And you're just going to keep it to yourself? She shot back. Yes. The word landed harder than I expected. Daniel looked at me as if trying to understand something he had never considered before. Mom, he said quietly. But Lily wasn't finished. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice rising. You have all this space, all these resources, and you're just going to waste it?
Waste.
I almost laughed. You see it as waste, I said. I see it as choice. Her expression hardened completely now. This is selfish, she said. There it was. The truth, finally spoken without disguise. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. It is. Daniel looked between us, clearly overwhelmed. Can we just calm down? He said. We don't have to decide everything right now. I turned to him. You already decided, I said. Before you even arrived. He didn't respond, because he knew I was right. Lili klappte herbei, her movements. This isn't over, she said. I met her gaze calmly. It is for today. She held my stare for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the door. Daniel hesitated, looking at me as if searching for something, understanding, maybe, or permission. He didn't find it. He followed her. A moment later, I heard the door close. The house fell silent again, but this time, the silence felt earned. I walked slowly back into the living room, looking around at the space they had already tried to claim. The furniture, the light, the quiet, it all felt more solid now, as if the boundaries had finally been drawn. I picked up my phone again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Everything was already in motion, and soon they would understand something they had never considered before. Not everything in my life was available to them. Not anymore. The call came 3 days later. Early. Too early for anything casual. Too sharp to be accidental. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, watching the morning light stretch across the garden when my phone started vibrating against the counter. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Sophia, what did you do? His voice was tight, stripped of politeness. I took a slow sip of coffee before replying. Good morning to you too. Don't do that, he snapped. I know you changed something. I got a call yesterday about documents, about verification. They said I'm not listed anymore. There it was. Faster than I expected, but not surprising. I see, I said calmly. You see, he repeated, his tone rising. That's all you have to say? I'm your son. And I'm your mother, I replied. There was a pause on the line, but it wasn't quiet. I could hear movement in the background. Lily's voice, sharp, demanding answers. What did you change? He asked. Come over, I said. We'll talk properly. We're already on our way. Of course they were. I ended the call and stood still for a moment, letting the silence return. Then I set my cup down carefully and walked upstairs. Daniel finally looked up at me, his expression strained. Mom, this is extreme. Is it? I repeated quietly. Or is it just unexpected? That's not the same thing, he said. It is when expectations were never promised, I replied. Lily leaned forward, her voice colder now. You let us believe we were part of your future, she said.
No, incorrecte.
You decided you were. That's not fair, she shot back. You showed us this house, you talked about space, about family. I showed you my home, I said. You turned it into a plan. Daniel ran a hand over his face, clearly struggling. We just thought, he started. Yes, I said. You thought. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Then Lily spoke, her voice low and sharp. So that's it? You're just going to throw everything away instead of helping your own family? I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm choosing where it goes. To strangers? She said incredulously. To people who understand value, I replied. Her expression hardened completely. This is selfish, she said again. I nodded once. Yes. Daniel looked at me, something breaking in his expression. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why would you do this? I met his eyes fully. Because I finally understand something I should have seen years ago, I said. You don't value me. You value what I have. That's not true, he said quickly. Then when was the last time you came to see me without wanting something? I asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Lily crossed her arms. This is emotional manipulation. No, I said calmly. This is clarity. She stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps. We were planning a future, she said. A real one. A family. And you just removed yourself from it. No, I said. I removed my assets from it. That hit harder than anything else. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. So what happens now? He asked. That depends on you, I said. Lily turned back sharply. No, it doesn't. This is already done, isn't it? Yes. She laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Unbelievable, she muttered. Then she looked at Daniel. Say something, she said. He hesitated, then looked at me. Is there any way to fix this? He asked. The question hung in the air longer than anything else had. I considered it. Not emotionally. Logically. There was, I said finally. A long time ago. His face fell slightly. And now? He asked. I shook my head. Now there are consequences. Lily grabbed her bag, her patience clearly gone. This isn't over, she said again, but this time it sounded less certain. It is, I replied. Daniel stood slowly, still holding the folder. He looked at it, then at me. You really meant it, he said. Yes. For a moment he didn't move. Then he nodded once and turned toward the door. Lily followed immediately. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt final. I stayed where I was for a few minutes, letting the quiet settle back in. Then I stood up, picked up my coffee, and walked toward the window. Outside, the garden moved gently in the breeze, untouched by everything that had just happened. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel conflicted. I felt settled. They had made their expectations clear, and now so had I. 6 months passed before I heard from Daniel again. Not a message. Not a call. Nothing. At first I noticed the silence. Then I adjusted to it. And eventually I stopped expecting anything at all. Life has a way of filling the space you once thought belonged to someone else. My days became structured in a way they hadn't been for years. Not busy in the exhausting sense, but full, intentionally full. I joined a local art group, something I had abandoned decades ago, without even realizing it. I started hosting small gatherings in my home, not formal dinners, just evenings with people who came because they wanted to be there, not because they expected something in return. The house changed. It became warmer, more alive. Not because of its size or its design, but because of who was inside it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting. I was living. The call came on a quiet afternoon. I had been in the garden, working with the soil, my hands covered in earth, the air filled with the faint scent of roses just beginning to bloom. When I went inside, I saw the missed call. Daniel. For a moment, I simply looked at the screen. Then I called back. He answered almost immediately. Mom, he said. His voice was different. Quieter. Less certain. Hello, Daniel. There was a pause. I was wondering if we could talk, he said. We are talking. No, he said quickly. I mean in person. I walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the garden. What about? I asked. About everything, he said. About what happened. About us. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him now. I didn't respond right away. Brian, he started, then stopped himself, correcting. Lily, she doesn't want me to call you. That caught my attention. Doesn't want you to? I repeated. No, he said. She thinks it's pointless.
Pointless.
Interesting. And you? I asked. Another pause. I don't think it is, he said quietly. I studied my reflection in the window for a moment. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had walked out of that restaurant months ago. Not hurt. Not uncertain. Just clear. You can come by, I said finally. This afternoon. Thank you, he said quickly. Too quickly. I ended the call and stood there for a moment longer. Part of me expected something, tension, maybe, or hesitation. But what I felt instead was something else entirely.
Control.
Not over him. Over myself. When he arrived, I noticed the difference immediately. Not in his clothes. Not in anything obvious. But in the way he stood. Less confident. Less certain of his place. He didn't walk in like he belonged there. He waited. I opened the door.
Come in, I said.
He stepped inside slowly, his eyes moving around the space, as if seeing it for the first time. It looks different, he said. It is, I replied. That was all. We moved into the sunroom, the one I had come to use the most. Light filled the space, soft and warm, the kind that made everything feel honest whether you wanted it to or not. I poured coffee. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then finally, she left, he said. I didn't react immediately. Lily? I asked. He nodded. When? I said. A few weeks ago. I took a slow sip of coffee. I see. He let out a short, bitter breath. That's it, he asked. You're not surprised? No, I said. He looked down. She said, he started then stopped, as if deciding whether to continue. She said there was no future, that things weren't going to work without support. Support. Another familiar word. And what do you think? I asked. He hesitated. I didn't see things clearly, he said. That was new. I studied him more carefully now. What changed? I asked. He let out a long breath, leaning back slightly. Everything, he said. When you changed everything, I thought you were being unfair. I thought you were punishing us. And now? I asked. He looked at me, really looked this time. Now I think you were protecting yourself, he said. The honesty in his voice was unexpected. I didn't respond right away. He leaned forward again, his hands tightening. I didn't realize how much we've expected from you, he continued. How much I expected. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. And when it was gone, he added quietly, so was everything else. Everything else. Including Lily. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. The words came out quickly, but not carelessly. For what? I asked. For not seeing it sooner, he said. For not saying anything that night. For letting things get to that point. I held his gaze. Why now? I asked. He didn't answer immediately.
Because the truth takes time.
Because I lost everything, he said finally. There it was.
Honest.
Not polished. Not perfect. But real. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You did. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just real. I don't expect anything, he said after a moment. I know things won't go back to how they were. No, I said. They won't. He swallowed slightly, then nodded. I just didn't want to leave it like this, he added. I set my cup down carefully. And what does fixing it look like to you? I asked. He looked down at his hands. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe just starting over. Starting over. Simple words. Difficult reality. With what expectations? I asked. He looked up. None, he said. I held his gaze for a moment longer, measuring the weight of that answer. Then I nodded. That's the only way it works, I said. He let out a quiet breath, as if something inside him had finally released. I understand, he said. I stood up and walked toward the door leading to the garden. Come on, I said. He looked confused. Where? Outside, I replied. There's work to do. For a second, he hesitated. Then he stood. We stepped into the garden together, the air warm, the ground soft beneath our feet. I handed him a pair of gloves. He looked at them, then at me. You want me to help? He asked. Yes, I said simply. Not as a test, not as a condition, just as a beginning. He put the gloves on. And for the first time in a long time, we stood side by side, not as expectations, not as obligations, but as two people who finally understood what had been lost. And what might still be rebuilt. Working in the garden together felt unfamiliar at first. Not uncomfortable, just quiet in a way we weren't used to. For years, every interaction between us had carried something underneath it. Expectation, obligation, unspoken tension. Even when we spoke politely, there was always something else present, something neither of us addressed. Now there was nothing but the sound of soil shifting, the soft rustle of leaves, and the occasional movement of tools against the ground. Daniel worked carefully, slower than I remembered. He wasn't used to this kind of work anymore, that much was obvious, but he didn't complain. He didn't rush. He simply followed what I showed him, listening more than speaking. That alone told me something had changed. After a while, he straightened up slightly, wiping his hands on the gloves. I forgot how quiet this feels, he said. The quiet was always there, I replied. You just weren't paying attention to it. He gave a small nod, accepting that without argument. We continued working. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time felt different out here. Less structured, less urgent. Eventually, he spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About expectations. I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on the soil in front of me. And I asked. I didn't realize how much I relied on things just being there, he said. On you being there. Not as a person, but as something stable. Something I didn't have to think about. That was honest. Uncomfortable, but honest. That's common, I said. It shouldn't be, he replied. I paused for a moment, then looked at him. No, I agreed. It shouldn't. He let out a breath, glancing around the garden. When everything changed, he continued, I didn't just lose what I expected. I realized I didn't actually understand what I had. I studied his expression carefully. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to shift responsibility, just recognition. And what did you have? I asked. He hesitated. A relationship I didn't value properly, he said. I nodded once. Yes. We returned to work, but something had shifted again. Not in the environment, but in the conversation. It felt less like a confrontation now and more like alignment. Not agreement, but awareness. After a while, I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. That's enough for today, I said. He stepped back slightly, looking at what we had done. It looks better, he said. It's a process, I replied. It doesn't change overnight. He glanced at me briefly. I know, he said. We walked back toward the house together, the transition from outside to inside almost symbolic. The garden was where things had been broken down, examined, turned over. The house was where things had to exist. We returned to the sunroom. I poured fresh coffee. This time he didn't hesitate before sitting. That, too, was different. For a few moments, we simply sat. Then he spoke again. I don't expect anything to change about everything else, he said, choosing his words carefully. The house. The money. I watched him as he spoke. I know that's done, he added. And I understand why. That mattered. Not because it fixed anything, but because it removed something. The expectation. Good, I said. He nodded. I just don't want that to be the only thing that defined us, he continued. I leaned back slightly. It won't be, I said, if you don't let it. He looked at me, searching for something. Is that enough? He asked. That depends on what you do next, I replied. He let out a small breath. I don't really know what that looks like yet, he admitted. That's honest, I said. And honesty is a better starting point than certainty. He gave a faint, almost relieved smile. I've been certain about the wrong things for a long time, he said. Yes, I replied. You have. There was no judgment in my voice, just fact. He accepted it. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not empty, not tense, just open. After a moment, he looked around the room again, taking in the details more carefully this time. You've changed things, he said. Yes. It feels lived in, he added. It is, I said. He nodded slowly, as if understanding something beyond the surface. I didn't realize how much you had outside of us, he said. That's because you didn't look, I replied. He didn't argue, because he couldn't. We sat there a little longer, and then he stood. I should go, he said. There was no hesitation in his voice this time. No expectation that I would ask him to stay. I stood as well. All right, I said. We walked to the door together. This moment felt familiar, but different in a way I couldn't ignore. Before, there had always been something unresolved, something unsaid lingering in the space between us. Now, there was clarity, not comfort, not closeness, but clarity. He paused at the door. Can I come back? He asked. I looked at him for a moment. Yes, I said. You can. No conditions, but also no promises. He nodded, accepting that exactly as it was. Thank you, he said. Then he left. I closed the door slowly and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet return once again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one felt balanced. I walked back into the house, moving through the rooms without thinking, letting the familiarity settle around me. Everything was exactly where it should be, not just physically, but in a way that felt deeper than that. For years, I had tried to hold on to something that didn't exist anymore. Now, I wasn't holding on to anything, and somehow that felt stronger. I stopped by the window, looking out at the garden we had worked on together. The soil had been turned, the plants repositioned, the space adjusted, not finished, not perfect, but improved. It was a small thing,
but it meant something.
because it proved that change didn't have to be dramatic to be real. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was slow. And sometimes it only started when you stopped expecting it to come easily. I turned away from the window and walked further into the house, already thinking about what needed to be done next, not out of necessity, but out of choice. That was the difference now. Everything I did was a choice. And for the first time in a long time, I understood exactly what that meant. Time didn't suddenly fix everything. There was no dramatic moment where everything felt whole again, no single conversation that erased what had happened. That's not how things work, not when the damage comes from years of quiet assumptions, from words left unsaid, from roles people fall into without ever questioning them. But something had changed, and that change was enough. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel came back, not often at first, not with any pattern, just occasionally. Sometimes he would call before, sometimes he would simply arrive and stand at the door the way he had that first time, waiting instead of assuming. That alone told me more than anything he could have said. We didn't talk about the past every time. In fact, most of the time, we didn't talk about it at all. Instead, we did simple things. We worked in the garden. We had coffee. Once, we spent an entire afternoon rearranging books in the library, not because they needed to be moved, but because it gave us something to do side by side, without forcing conversation. And slowly, without either of us announcing it, something began to rebuild. Not the same relationship we had before. Something different. Something quieter. Stronger in a way that didn't depend on expectations. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden, Daniel broke the silence. "I've been thinking about the house," he said. I didn't look at him right away. "And?" I asked. "I understand why you did what you did," he said. "About everything." I turned slightly toward him. "That's good," I said. He nodded, then added, "I don't think I would have understood it before." "No," I said. "You wouldn't have." There was no tension in that answer, just truth. He picked at the edge of his glove for a moment, then looked up. "Are you really going to give it all away?" he asked. "Yes." The word came easily now.
No hesitaste.
He studied my face, as if searching for doubt. He didn't find any. "Even this house?" he asked. "Yes." He leaned back slightly, exhaling. "That used to bother me," he admitted. "A lot." "And now?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Now I think it makes sense," he said. "If it's your choice." I nodded once. "That's the only reason it matters," I said. He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I never really understood that before," he said. "I know," I replied. We sat in silence again, but it wasn't the kind that needed to be filled. After a while, he spoke again. "I've been trying to figure things out," he said. "On my own." "How is that going?" I asked. He let out a short breath, almost a quiet laugh. "Harder than I expected," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It usually is." "But also clearer," he added. That caught my attention. "In what way?" I asked. He looked out at the garden. "I used to think stability came from what you had," he said. "Money, space, things like that. Now I think it comes from knowing what actually belongs to you and what doesn't." I studied him for a moment. That wasn't something I had taught him directly. That was something he had learned. "That's a good realization," I said. He nodded. "I wish I had understood it sooner," he added. "Most people don't," I replied. He looked at me then more directly. "Do you regret it?" he asked.
What?
I said. "Everything," he clarified. "Changing things. Cutting us out. Letting it go this far." I considered the question carefully, because it deserved a real answer. "No," I said finally. He held my gaze, waiting. "I regret not seeing things clearly sooner," I continued. but I don't regret what I did once I understood them. He nodded slowly, accepting that. I think I needed it to happen, he said after a moment. That doesn't make it easy, I replied. No, he said, but it makes it necessary. We sat there a little longer, the air warm, the garden quiet around us. Then he said something I hadn't expected. I don't want anything from you, he said. I looked at him, not because I doubted the words, but because I wanted to understand them. Nothing, I asked. He shook his head. Not like before, he said. Not as something I expect. I watched him carefully. And what do you want? I asked. He hesitated. Time, he said, to show that I can be different. That was a different kind of answer. Not immediate, not convenient, but real. Then take it, I said. He looked at me surprised. That's it, he asked. That's all there is, I replied, because that was the truth.
There were no shortcuts left.
No easy ways back. Only time. Only actions. We stayed in the garden until the light began to fade, neither of us rushing to leave, neither of us forcing anything more than what was already there. Eventually he stood. I should go, he said. I nodded. All right. We walked back to the house together, just like before. At the door, he paused. I'll come by next week, he said. All right, I replied.
No expectación.
No pressure, just possibility. He gave a small nod, then stepped outside. I watched as he walked to his car, got in, and drove away, not quickly, not abruptly, just normally. And for the first time, it didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. It felt like he was continuing something. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet settle once again. Then I walked through the house slowly, taking it all in. The light, the space, the life I had built. Everything was exactly as it should be. Not perfect, not untouched by what had happened, but honest. And that mattered more. I stopped in the living room, looking out at the garden one last time before the evening fully set in. There was no dramatic ending, no final resolution tied neatly into place. Just something simpler. I had chosen my life. I had protected it. And in doing so, I hadn't lost everything. I had made space for something real to grow in its place. Not guaranteed, not effortless, but real. And at this point in my life, that was more than enough. I turned away from the window, the quiet following me as I moved deeper into the house. Not empty, not lonely, just mine.